First off, I wanted to ask you kind of like, what are you guys showcasing over here? Is it kind of an outreach program, or what are you guys doing here over at GDC?
Well, I mean, a number of different things, I suppose. We're talking up. Did you attend our talk this morning?
I wasn't able to make it now.
So we're talking a lot about the developers that have come to work at Ouya, who have made games for you, who've kind of chosen to maybe use us as a sort of a second or primary publishing platform, and talking a lot about how we've just gotten over the 500 game mark, for example, in like 4 months, and things are actually going pretty well. So a lot of different things.
Do you have any post-launch thoughts about how things have progressed over the past few months?
So the watchword that Julie keeps saying is, yes, we've made some mistakes, which is true. But overall, we feel that the mood, if you like, around Ouya has actually started to turn very positive. That a lot of, as people have sort of seen the initial units came out and maybe the initial spread of games, there might have been something of a kind of an expectations mismatch to an extent. But like I say, now that we've gotten over, for example, 500 games, we've got games like Towerfall and Another World and stuff. People are starting to see that actually we're serious and that there's a lot of depth to what we're trying to do, you know. And a lot of the content is quite different from, I think, what maybe more stereotypical people might have thought like that we were going to have, you know, that it's not just mobile games. Actually, it's a lot of weird indie stuff and a lot of kind of fun.
And speaking of your 500 game mark and whatnot, I think one of the biggest problems, even with the larger console developers, even with Apple with the app stores, curation seems to be that nut that nobody can crack. Mm-hmm. What are you guys doing over at Ouya in order to make sure that the cream rises to the top, and how little developers, very small one-person teams, can get a game out there and not have it be buried in the shuffle?
Okay. So there's kind of two parts to that answer, I guess. One is to talk about existing issues that are in that end of the market, if you like. And so between, say, Apple and Android, you've got two systems there where there are tens of thousands of developers. It's not just games, I mean all sorts of apps, all trying to compete for that sort of real estate attention. And in one example, in Android's example, for example, they've tended to maybe leave that to be a little more programmatic, a little more algorithmic, a little more like the market will sort itself out. In Apple's case, there's a lot of that, like what's in the charts and stuff, but they've also taken a more editorial stance. But their stance applies across every kind of app that they have. So there's only a certain amount of attention that they can give. I guess for me personally, what we have as kind of advantage is we are very specifically about games and about game developers and game makers. We're very personally motivated, just as players ourselves, as designers, as developers. We're very personally motivated to see interesting games find a home, find a voice. So we take an active hand in compiling what's in the interface. We take an active hand in trying to make sure that the content is fresh. We take an active hand. We are taking further active hands in trying to promote and push and talk about and get people interested in developers. And we're trying to do that not because, for Ouya's sake, but we're doing it for the sake of like guys like Nickel Hunt, for example, or like the guys who putting together Diner Run 2, or like whatever. Like we're trying to give all of those kind of people a lot of voice.
The other thing I was going to ask you about is market penetration. You're at a very competitive price point. You've been able to. You're in retail now. How has that looked ever since that you've from Kickstarter to just the initial batch of units now to being at Best Buy or GameStop, for instance? How has that market penetration looked in the past couple of months?
So I can't really talk about specifics at the moment because just we're not ready to necessarily sort of get into like there'll be like 10,000 questions about what does this mean, what's that exactly. But certainly internally we're very encouraged by what we see. It's not just in the old form way of looking at these things, it's just about units sold, and units sold is important, but it's also, in the new way of looking at things, it's also about usage, it's also about re-engagement, it's also about, well, actually, how many games do people play, how many big games do people try, what do they spend, and stuff like that. And we're looking at a lot of indicators internally. Again, I'm afraid I can't substantiate this with specifics, but we're looking at a lot of indicators internally that make us go, like put smiles on our faces, right? And make us go like, yeah, this is good. This is going very well. This is cool. You know.
The reason I'm asking about that is I'm noticing a theme at the conference that monetization and tracking of players is it seems to be a big theme here. The question that I have in terms of app development and for people wanting to develop for your platform, I think the real issue about units sold is because how do developers monetize, and how I know by having that try it for free model, how is it that developers can make sure that when they make a game for Ouya, they're able to make a return on what they're developing?
Well, I mean that's a complex question, but let me give you an example. Okay, so at the moment, in Appland generally, there is a tendency, I think, for developers to think in terms of like not just one model, but one way of applying one model of like free to play or something, and then judging their performance on a very rigid graph, like that sort of goes, you've got this many whale players, and you've got this, you should expect these kind of returns from this kind of broad base, and you should make sure that there are these many types of virtual good to sell, and that, blah, 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 okay? But actually the history of how free-to-play worked, say in the Facebook days, doesn't really support that. There is and was quite a lot of developers, for example, working in the Facebook space who had like tiny audiences, but they were very passionate. Like they had like, my friend Carl Bunyan, for example, ran a football game, a soccer game for a few years, a soccer management game. Right. He had like an audience that measured in like the thousands, like not like the millions, but the thousands. But he was certainly enough, because of the way he had designed the game, because of the model that he used, it was more than enough, and because his users were very passionate, it was more than enough for him to earn like a pretty substantial living doing it and serve a community that really cared about the game that he was kind of playing, and all of those things, right? So it is not as simple as there are these many phones out in the world, therefore, right? I mean, there are, 20% as many iPhones out there as there are Android phones, but iPhones get monetized a lot better because they approach the problem much better than Android sort of as a platform does, right? So how do developers ensure that they get a good return? By designing games that are fit to do that, and which particularly are designed to engage like fans for real, like sort of not just sort of making some generic clone game, that conforms to a certain formula that casual players will just sort of play, but actually doing a real proper job of trying to make sure that, if they're going to make a space shooting game, that it's the best freaking space shooting game ever made, and it's built in such a way that people who really want to monetize with it and really want to support it can do so as much as they want.
Right. My last question for you.
I've got a meeting as well. So
sure. Real last question is talking about the annualization process. Where are you looking in terms of as a creative development, in terms of creative director? Where do you see that annualization being a benefit, or could there be an argument about fragmentation?
So you mean if we iterate the console every year? There's always going to be some amount of variance. That's unavoidable. But we do have the advantage, similar to iPhone, of having a very clear and controlled sort of spec of what it is that we do. We're not doing the sort of thing that some of our competitors do, of like changing their architecture every few years and sort of destroying their back catalog in the process and stuff. So yeah, it's a risk. But I think because we're doing it in an iterative fashion, I think because we're evolving the product like year to year to year, I'm much less concerned about that as a risk than if I was doing it every 5 years.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I gotta go.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.